my name is Raegan Robertson, and I am a freshman at Oregon State University, and I'm going to be reading Chapter 6 of the Ickabog for you. So let's get started. Okay. Chapter 6, The Fight in the Courtyard. There was a courtyard behind the palace where peacocks walked, fountains played, and statues of former kings and queens kept watch. As long as they didn't pull the peacocks' tails, jump in the fountains, or climb the statues, the children of the palace servants were allowed to play in the courtyard after school. Sometimes Lady Eslanda, who liked children, would come and make daisy chains with them. But the most exciting thing of all was when King Fred came out onto the balcony and waved, which made all the children cheer, bow, and curtsy as their parents had taught them. The only time the children fell silent, ceased their games of hopscotch, and stopped pretending to fight the Ickabog, was when the Lords Spittleworth and Flapoon passed through the courtyard. These two lords weren't fond of children at all. They thought the little brats made far too much noise in the late afternoon, which was precisely the time when Spittleworth and Flapoon liked to take a nap between hunting and dinner. One day, shortly after Bert and Daisy's 7th birthdays, when everyone was playing as usual between the fountains and the peacocks, the daughter of the new head seamstress, who was wearing a beautiful dress of rose pink brocade, said, "Oh, I do hope the king waves at us today." "Well, I don't," said Daisy, who couldn't help herself and didn't realize how loudly she'd spoken. The children all gasped and turned to look at her. Daisy felt hot and cold at once, seeing them all glaring. "You shouldn't have said that," whispered Bert. As he was standing right next to Daisy, the other children were staring at him too. "I don't care," said Daisy, color rising in her face. She'd started now, so she might as well finish. "If he hadn't worked my mother so hard, she'd still be alive." Daisy felt as though she'd been wanting to say that out loud for a very long time. There was another gasp from all the surrounding children, and a maid's daughter actually squealed in terror. "He's the best king of cornucopia we've ever had," said Bert, who'd heard his mother say so many times. "No, he isn't," said Daisy loudly. "He's selfish, vain, and cruel." "Daisy," whispered Bert, horrified. Don't be silly." It was the word silly that did it. Silly. When the new head seamstress's daughter smirked and whispered behind her hand to her friends while pointing at Daisy's overalls. Silly. When her father wiped away his tears in the evenings, thinking Daisy wasn't looking. Silly. When to talk to her mother, she had to visit a cold white headstone. Daisy drew back her hand and smacked Bert right across the face. Then the oldest Roach brother, whose name was Roderick, and who now lived in Daisy's old bedroom, shouted, "Don't let her get away with that, Butterball," and led all the boys in shouts of "Fight, fight, fight." Terrified, Bert gave Daisy's shoulder a half-hearted shove, and it seemed to Daisy that the only thing to do was to launch herself at Bert. And everything became dust and elbows until suddenly the two children were pulled apart by Bert's father, Major Beamish, who'd come running out of the palace on hearing the commotion to find out what was going on. "Dreadful behavior," muttered Lord Spittleworth, walking past the major and the two sobbing, struggling children. But as he turned away, a broad smirk spread over Lord Spittleworth's face. He was a man who knew how to turn a situation to good use, and he thought he might have found a way to banish children, or some of them anyway, from the palace courtyard. So that was Chapter 6. I hope you enjoyed it. Tells tales. That night, the two lords dined, as usual, with King Fred. After a sumptuous meal of Baronstone venison, accompanied by the finest Jeroboam wine, followed by a selection of Kurtzberg cheeses and some of Mrs. Beamish's Featherlight Fairies cradles. Lord Spittleworth decided the moment had come. He cleared his throat, then said, I do hope, Your Majesty, that you weren't disturbed by that disgusting fight among the children in the courtyard this afternoon. Fight? Repeated King Fred, who'd been talking to his tailor about the design for a new cloak, so he had heard nothing. What fight? Oh dear, I thought Your Majesty knew, said Lord Spittleworth, pretending to be startled. Perhaps Major Beamish could tell you all about it. But King Fred was amused rather than disturbed. Oh, I believe scuffles among children are quite usual, Spittleworth. Spittleworth and Flapoon exchanged looks behind the king's back, and Spittleworth tried again. Your Majesty is, as ever, the very soul of kindness, said Spittleworth. Of course, some kings, Flapoon muttered, brushing crumbs off the front of his waistcoat. If they'd heard that a child spoke of the crown so disrespectfully. What's that? Exclaimed Fred, the smile fading from his face. A child spoke of me disrespectfully? Fred couldn't believe it. He was used to the children shrieking with excitement when he bowed to them from the balcony. I believe so, Your Majesty, said Spittleworth, examining his fingernails. But as I mentioned, it was Major Beamish who separated the children. He has all the details. The candles sputtered a little in their silver sticks. Children say all manner of things in fun, said King Fred. Doubtless the child meant no harm. Sounded like bally treason to me, grunted Flapoon. But, said Spittleworth swiftly, it is Major Beamish who knows all the details. Flapoon and I may, perhaps, have misheard. Fred sipped his wine. At that moment, a footman entered the room to remove the pudding plates. Cankerby, said King Fred, for such was the footman's name. Fetch Major Beamish here. Unlike the king and the two lords, Major Beamish didn't eat 7 courses for dinner every night. He'd finished his supper hours ago and was getting ready for bed when the summons from the king arrived. The major hastily swapped his pajamas for his uniform and dashed back to the palace, by which time King Fred, Lord Spittleworth, and Lord Flapoon had retired to the yellow parlor, where they were sitting on satin armchairs, drinking more Jeroboam wine, and in Flapoon's case, eating a second plate of fairies' cradles. Ah, Beamish, said King Fred, as the major made a deep bow. I hear there was a little commotion in the courtyard this afternoon. The major's heart sank. He'd hoped that the news of Bert and Daisy's fight wouldn't reach the king's ears. Oh, it was really nothing, Your Majesty, said Beamish. Come, Beamish, said Flapoon. You should be proud that you've taught your son not to tolerate traitors. There was no question of treachery, said Major Beamish. They're only children, my lord. I do understand that your son defended me, Beamish, said King Fred. Major Beamish was in a most unfortunate position. He didn't want to tell the king what Daisy had said. Whatever his own loyalty to the king, he quite understood why the motherless little girl felt the way she did about Fred, and the last thing he wanted to do was to get her into trouble. At the same time, he was well aware that there were 20 witnesses who could tell the king exactly what Daisy had said, and was sure of that if he lied. Lord Spittleworth and Lord Flapoon would tell the king that he, Major Beamish, was also disloyal and treacherous. Yes, Your Majesty, it's true that my son Bert defended you, said Major Beamish. However, Allowance must surely be made for the little girl who said the unfortunate thing about your majesty. She's passed through a great deal of trouble, your majesty, and even unhappy grown-ups may talk wildly at some times. What kind of trouble has the girl passed through? Asked King Fred, who couldn't imagine any good reason for a subject to speak rudely of him. Her name is Daisy Dovetail, your majesty, said Major Beamish, staring over King Fred's head at a picture of his father, King Richard the Righteous. Her mother was a seamstress who... Yes, I remember, said King Fred loudly, cutting off Major Beamish. Very well, that's all, Beamish. Off you go. Somewhat relieved, Major Beamish bowed deeply again, and had almost reached the door when he had heard the king's voice. What exactly did the girl say, Beamish? Major Beamish paused with his hand on the doorknob. There was nothing else for it but to tell the truth. She said that your majesty is selfish, vain, and cruel, said Major Beamish. Not daring to look at the king, he left the room. And that's the end of chapter 7. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun reading for you guys. Enjoy the rest of the story. Bye!